welcome to another Nations of Coaches growth series. Coaches, we are so glad that you are here with us. At Nations of Coaches, our desire is to help coaches grow in every way so that all that coaches influence will be impacted for the glory of God. We want to help equip coaches so that they can leave a legacy of excellence. On today's growth series, we're going to talk about a higher level of perseverance. Incredible guest today. I'm so honored that Coach Adrian Griffin is with us. Hello, Coach.
Hey, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Oh man, what an honor. What an absolute honor for us. We're so glad that you are here with us today. I'm sure that most of you watching know so much about Coach Griffin with his storied career, but for those of you who don't, let me give you just a little bit of an update. Coach Griffin's bride is named Kathy. 4 adult children, AJ, Alan, Aubrey, and Vanessa. Coach Griffin, as you can tell by his hat today, has played at Seton Hall, amazing a career at Seton Hall. And then perseverance number 1, 3 years fighting in the USBL. I remember that league, the CBA, and overseas in Italy to finally fight his way to the NBA. And then amazing 9 years in the NBA with the Celtics, the Mavs, the Rockets, the Bulls, and the Supersonics. Great playing career. Then again, perseverance number 2, 15 years serving in the NBA as an assistant coach with the Bucks, the Bulls, the Magic, the Thunder, the Raptors. 2 championships, 1999 championship in the CBA. That was a long time ago, Coach.
Yeah.
And then 2019 NBA championship with the Raptors. Unbelievable. And then on June 5th, 2023, Coach Griffin was named the head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. Whoo, Coach, what an amazing career.
Well, I have to credit my parents for that, just instilling a lot of, good values and principles in me and my siblings and, to never give up. So, they taught me about the Lord, and I credit that for the reason I'm able to be here.
Yeah, what an amazing career and still going. I know God's going to continue to use you in an amazing way, Coach. All right, coaches, get your pens out. I tell you this each growth series, get your pens out, get your paper out. I know, coaches, most of you are going to be on a laptop typing in notes, but for us old guys, we're going to be writing with our pen and using paper. And let's learn. Let's learn today, coaches, from a man who has done so much and has required so much perseverance. Let's learn today and get better. So, Coach Griffin, question number 1, as a former NBA player and NBA coach, how have you seen the influence of a coach shape players on and off the court?
Well, number one, a coach has the power to shape, far more than just a player's game. They shape their identity, their confidence, their mindset. And the best coaches that I've been around, they understood that it's not just about coaching the performance, but it's about coaching the person, that the human person inside that jersey, and really connecting with them. And I'll give you a prime example. When I was playing with the Dallas Mavericks in '06, and Avery Johnson was the head coach then, and we went to the finals, by the way. But I can remember during the regular season, it was after a game, and I was driving home, and all of a sudden my phone rang, and I saw it was Avery Johnson. And I was thinking to myself, Lord, what did I do? I mean, we called him the Little General. That was his nickname. And I'm thinking like, man, this guy's about to rip me a new one. And, he had that old kind of Southern voice. Hey, Griffey, how you doing, Griffey? And I was like, I'm doing good, coach. And he said, hey, turn your car around and come have dinner with me, and just come out, hang out, and kick it with me. So I turned the car around to. We went to this really really nice restaurant, and we didn't talk about basketball at all. And he just wanted to connect with me and spend some time with me because I was a role player, and sometimes role players don't get a lot of attention. But that meant a lot to me, and it made me want to play even harder for him. And that's the beauty of building those connections and relationships. Players that do just enough of their job, to keep their job. But if you're talking about winning and winning on a high level and on any level, you want players to run through the wall for you. And
Yeah.
that made me want to run through the wall for Coach Johnson because he took the time to 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 spend time with me, and that meant a lot to me.
Yeah. Yeah. That relationship, coach player relationship is just so incredible. And in preparation for this, I read so many quotes about you from players who said you stood in the gap with them as an assistant coach and as a head coach, that you took what you learned from Coach Johnson and other coaches, and you stood there with them and helped them get better on and off the court. Who have been, you mentioned Coach Johnson, who have been the other influences in your coaching career, and in your life?
Definitely have to be um, early in my life. I think that's when coaching is so important because it really shapes who you are and who you want to be. So I had my junior high coach was extremely tough and disciplined, and he demanded the most out of us. His name was Coach Jackson. And then when I got into high school, Coach Ed Southern, he was instrumental in putting me on the perimeter. Because back then I was about 6'4", 6'5", and I played underneath the basket. And he had the foresight to see that, hey, if you're going to play college basketball, we got to move you to perimeter. And he also sent me to five-star camp out
Mm,
in Pennsylvania. And I never heard of five-star camp. And he told me that going into my senior year that summer, he said, hey, you got to get more visibility. So there's this camp called Five Star that we're going to send you to. And at the time, we didn't necessarily have the funds. So someone sponsored me to go out there. And this is when, Five Star was the top camp out, in the nation, but I didn't know it at the time.
yeah.
Howard Garfinkel and those guys. And I ended up competing and playing very well there. And then going into after my, well, during the college season, I always wanted to, I'm sorry, during my high school final year, I always wanted to play big time college basketball, but I was only getting recruited by mid-major schools like Creighton and Tulsa and Loyola in Chicago, which were all fine institutions. But I wanted to play. I grew up watching the Big East on television and
Yeah.
weekends and stuff. And one of the assistant coaches for Seton Hall, uh, you know, Seton Hall had a couple of people reneged on the scholarship. I think one of them was Roger Rose. I don't know if you remember him, but he signed with Seton Hall. Then he ended up going to Kentucky, and another guy signed there at Seton Hall and ended up leaving. And so the one of the assistant coach, I believe it was Coach Mike Brown, said, "Hey, how about that kid from Kansas?" In classic PJ style. PJ like can't no kid. He used different words, but he said can't no kid from Kansas play in the Big East. But this assistant coach was so persistent, and he believed in me, man, and he convinced PJ to give me a scholarship, and that really changed my life. So my high school coach, man, he really had the foresight of what I needed to do to play major college basketball, and it really changed my life when nobody believed in me. And I'll tell you a quick story. When I did sign with Seton Hall, there was this NBA and college scout. I won't say his name, but he was well known, and he wrote an article and said that Seton Hall made the biggest mistake of signing Adrian Griffin. He's
Mm,
he's going to sit the bench for 4 years, and returned to Kansas and pumped gas at a local gas station.
Wow.
Yeah, when I'm 18,
Wow.
there wasn't social media back then, so all this was, this was in newspapers and articles, and where you could had to pick up and read. And I remember just first, I felt like, who does this guy, think he is? Because he didn't know what I was made of, and
Right.
my dad, he instilled a great sense of faith in me, and I wanted to prove him wrong. And sometimes, adversity comes in your life so that it tightens you up, refocus you. And so I needed that. But, my early on high school coaches, man, I would never um, underestimate coaches on any level. Sometimes coaches on a professional level, because it's more visible, get a lot of attention. But man, my coaches in the CBA believed in me. Tyler Jones, he was there for me. So you never know the impact you have on someone else's dream. So I would encourage every coach on any level just to keep pouring into people, because I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here without them.
Yeah, coach, you played in the NBA 9 years, coached in the NBA 16 years. And when I ask you about your coaches, you go back to your junior high coach and your high school coach. And that's amazing.
Yes, it is.
That's amazing. And I just encourage coaches all the time. It doesn't matter the level.
It doesn't.
Your big time is where you're at.
Yes.
And I think that's incredible. Now you're in the NBA. Who are some NBA coaches, Coach Griffin, that had a big influence on you?
All my coaches that I played for and coached for, I mean, Hall of Fame coaches, they've always all had a profound impact on my playing and coaching philosophy. But I try to take something from all the coaches. I started my coaching career with Scott Skiles, who was big on accountability. And I also played for Scott Skiles as well. And I enjoyed playing for him. Some people thought he was a little hard, but he was black and white. If you played hard, if you bought in, you played. And he didn't care if you were the 10th, 11th, 12th guy on the end of the bench. If you practice hard, he was going to reward you. So I never had a problem with that type of coaching. He was phenomenal to me, and he gave me my first shot at coaching. I coached with him the first 2 years, and so um, the inner it's so important to enter into your coaching profession under someone like a Scott Skiles, who was big on discipline, accountability, and coaching guys hard, but he was fair. It was tough,
Mm,
but he was fair. Um, and then I did 5 years with Tom Thibodeau. Man, that was like basketball 101. He
mm,
he leaves no stone or rock unturned. I mean, when he demands a lot, but he also demands a lot of himself. And some
mm,
coaches are not. Um, consistent with what they preach. But Tom preaches hard work. He preaches hard work, and man, that he works harder than anyone I ever seen. He's the first one there, last one to leave. Every time you enter the gym, he has that light on, uh, up in the office and just grinding away. And there's you know I always say, just but be true to yourself. Um, just because one coach has success one way, that doesn't mean you have to be, there at 5:30 a.m. and leave at
right.
9:30 a.m. I always say, just do a hard day's work, look yourself in the mirror, and if and you feel good about what you accomplished, get out of there. But Tom was so instrumental as far as teaching me what it takes to win on the NBA level. And then I had Billy Donovan, and
Mm,
you know what Billy really taught me. I think one of the biggest lessons Billy taught me was to be true to yourself, to your authentic voice. Because I had been around, from college to PJ Carlesimo, Scott Skiles. Tom Thibodeau, fiery coaches. Um, but he taught me that you don't necessarily have to, there's just a kind of stigma about coaching that you gotta yell and scream and all this stuff. But Billy didn't raise his voice one time, man, but he was equally effective with his communication. I thought he was a master communicator.
Yeah.
Just the way he connected with the players, where the players bought in. He was an unbelievable teacher. So that really opened my eyes that there's different ways, to skin a cat, different ways to develop as a coach. You don't have to try to be somebody else because the players, they see that, if you're trying to be, I've been around coaches who try to be like, Tom Thibodeau or Coach K or something, and the players can see that, but just be yourself, and being a leader, being a coach, you have to wear many different hats anyway. There's going to be times where you got to be more aggressive. There's going to be times where you're going to have to pat him on the back. But Billy Donovan was phenomenal, just with the way he connected with the players.
Mhm.
And then Nick Nurse, he brought so much to the game as far as creativity. I just give you a quick story. We're in the second game of the finals in against Golden State Warriors, and we're down almost by 20, and Steph was cooking, and I think Clay may have fouled out, so Steph is now the only one on the floor. So in the timeout, they say, "Listen, we're going to a box of one." And prior to that, we never ran a box of one. I didn't even know he knew what a box of one was. I barely knew what a box of one.
Oh, wow.
And and this is the beauty of coaching. All through the year, though, we challenge our guys to be open and flexible, uh, adjustable, um, making adjustments throughout the game. Sometimes we'll go in the zone, we'll go in the blitz, we'll deny. We had all these different coverages, and the players really bought into that. Unfortunately, a lot of coaches sometimes they get into the playoffs or big time games, and then they want to try to implement new stuff. But I learned that from Nick Nurse, and we were working on that stuff in training camp. But we never worked on boxing one. But because,
Wow, that's a great story.
yeah, but because our guys knew that we could change at any moment, man, and he just told us that, all right, you two here, and then we put our quickest guy uh on Steph who can keep up with him, and we almost came back and won the game. We had a chance to tie the game or win the game at the buzzer, but being down almost 20 in the fourth quarter. But Nick Nurse was always doing something like that. Man, he was unbelievable with in-game adjustments and just the way he
Yeah.
saw the game. And so you take a little bit of or a lot from all those
You're
coaches
right.
and make it your own.
All right, you note takers out there. Here's the words: accountability, fairness, be true to yourself, authenticity, great communicator, teaching your players to be flexible and be willing to adjust. And wow, that's good. You've had so many good mentors and coaches in your life that have helped to shape. And what a great privilege that we have as coaches to have a lifetime of being able to influence the people that play for us and those that we're connected with. Um, Coach, God often does His greatest work during our deepest times of challenge. And you haven't been in coaching year and a half, and how has God used this to shape you, reshape you for your good? And how has this time away from coaching ended up being a blessing?
Oh, wow. First, this past season, being away from basketball has been probably the most humbling, but also the most transforming season, of my life. When I got fired, obviously you sit there with a lot of disappointment, but you also get to sit with God. It was the first time in my life I've been always been part of the NBA, always on the go. And it's the first time in my life where I got to be still. I got
Mm,
to reconnect to who I am as a person, not just as a coach. My identity has always been tied up in sports, always been tied up having that NBA level, NBA title. I was always a NBA player or NBA coach, but I really got to reconnect to who I am, and that's a child of God, number one. And I got to reconnect with my wife, and just anybody that's in a relationship in collegiate or NBA sports or professional sports knows that there's just no time to do anything. We got to go for walks, we got to have dinner, go on trips and spend time together. I got to reconnect with my children, and my youngest son was stepping away from the NBA, so I got to be there for him. My youngest daughter um, was she won a national championship with
yeah.
Yukon Huskies, and we got to be there and witness that. And my two older children, they were trying to work out their things and find their identity. So it's been cool to kind of have a quote unquote normal life for once. Obviously, I do miss the sport. I do miss coaching and connecting with the players. But God, He doesn't make mistakes, and being let go. Obviously, it stings in the beginning, but it's allowed me to refocus on who I am, shape my philosophy, and on and off the court, and just really connect to the why and who I am, and we'll just see what God has in store next.
I can't wait to see. I cannot wait to see. Amazing answer, Coach. Perseverance is the ability to positively adapt and bounce back stronger and better than ever from adversity. You've already talked about it a little bit. You've always exhibited perseverance in your life, Coach. Persevering through the USBL, the CBA overseas to reach your dream. Persevering, we learned today in high school to get to high major
Mhm.
basketball. Persevering in the NBA through 15 seasons of being an assistant coach to get that shot to sit in the seat. What are three or four things that you would share with coaches who are currently facing a time of challenge that would help them as they're seeking to persevere?
I think number one is just take ownership. The accountability part is number one. When I got let go, the first thing I did was grab a pen and paper, and I wrote down all the things that I needed to improve on. It doesn't do anybody good to point fingers or or cast blame. You have to really own it, look in the mirror and say, okay, I could have done better. That's where the beauty, that's where the magic starts. That's something that my dad taught me a long time ago, and that's what's helped me even as a player. I always wanted feedback. I always wanted to know what I needed to do better. And again, it's things at first, nobody wants to hear what they done poorly, but you got to correct your mistakes, but at the end of the day, there's no such thing as mistakes. There's only learning opportunities. So one, and that's what one I would say, just be honest with yourself. Don't tell yourself lies. Get to the root of what's going on so that you can correct it. Two, I would say just reconnect to your why. It's going to help you persevere,
Mm,
through the hard times. You know, my main goal is to help these young men become better men. And you could say in the NBA, they're boys now coming into the league, and you want to help them become stronger men and build that strong character. And some of it has been lost, along the way as far as some of the deep rooted values and discipline that we've had, and it's only because we're not teaching it, we're not demanding it, and we have to believe it in ourselves. And then
mm.
there are going to
That's right.
be some pushback sometimes, when you're standing on morals and you standing on beliefs, and You have to be willing to live with those. But I always say the hardcore fundamentals of the game are the same. We need the old school fundamentals, right? But the way you deliver them has changed. We still have to hold our people accountable. But my mentor always tells me your voice is choice. How you use your voice is so important. If you're going to use it to demean and belittle somebody, it's probably not going to turn out, well for you. But if you
Mhm.
use your voice to uplift, encourage, and hold people accountable, you're going to have those long lasting relationships. And I think lastly, this goes really understated and overlooked, but I believe as coaches, you have to take care of yourself. There's a lot of mental health awareness for players, which rightly so, because they are why we do what we do. But also, the coaches, we're the closest thing next to the players. The players hear our voice more than anybody. And I
Yeah,
always thought, it was perplexing why people don't, organizations don't invest in coaches a little bit more as far as mental health, because we have a direct impact on players. And, you know, I, I did my PhD on stress and stressors of
I read that.
assistant NBA coaches. And what I learned, I interviewed about 20 assistant coaches. And what I learned is that all of us, including myself, were just suffering in silence. Coaches suffer in silence. We're not supposed to show that we have any ails and weaknesses and shortcomings and we got it all together. But I think that's really a false approach that we're taking. We really have to, again, be honest with ourselves about what we need to be successful on and off the court. And our mental health is it's important, and
Yeah.
a lot of us have vices that we use, some positive, some not so positive. So I try to encourage coaches to find ways to cope with the stress, because the pressures and expectations are not going to change. And that's one thing I try to tell coaches: be realistic with that. In the NBA, it's going to be a ton of expectations, pressure, and commitment. That's not going to change. But we
Right.
can change our approach and how we deal with them and how we respond with those things. Is it taking walks? My faith is where I try to find some relief. If it's prayer, meditation, reading, some people like, maybe if it's getting a massage, or if, you got to find ways to cope, really take the
Yeah.
time off and find ways to cope with the stress, or it's going to eat you up, and it may not be visible on the outside, but man, on the inside, like I said, a lot of coaches were struggling and suffering. And we have to do better with addressing that.
It's terrific answer, Coach. I love to go back and find your why.
Yes.
During most of us have a time in between coaching jobs,
Mhm.
and to take advantage of that time. And then I love we talk so much about taking care of ourselves, and it's usually meant the physical part of us, but to
Yes.
take care of the spiritual part of us too, and the mental part of us. That's great, great wisdom. So you've been really successful. What are three or four things that are your personal habits? You just mentioned one of them. And you're taking time away with God, in God's word, in prayer, in meditation. Or what are three or four personal disciplines that you have had in your successful career that have led to that success?
Well, definitely, my faith and belief in my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. My father was a minister for almost 25 years before he passed away. But we were raised in the church, man, and back then you went to church 3 or 4 times a week, and I'm not saying that that makes you better or than anybody else. It allowed you to develop a strong foundation, of the Word of God, and so everything that I've gone through, I know I'm not going through alone. I think the
Mhm.
most important lesson my dad taught me that will be trials and tribulations.
Yes.
Sometimes it's unfortunate sometimes especially you see kids growing up in the AU and high school and stuff, and they've never been through adversity, and then the first time of their life when they're trying to get to the next level or get to the next level, and someone says, "Hey, you're not that special," it kind of rocks them. But I understood early on that um, it's not what happens to you; it's how you respond to it. So my faith is even now. I got rocked. When I got let go with the Bucks, but I always know that God has a bigger plan. Um, I think you have to have the next thing. I think you have to strong work ethic. There's no way
Yeah.
around it. Watch a ton of film, trying to break down film, trying to get better and learn from others. Man, when I was the head coach with the Bucks, man, I looked at videos from high school coaches, from college, collegiate coaches, and clinics from you name it. I'm just trying to find ways to get better. I never had an ego in that sense or pride. So, especially being a role player, you learn sacrifice, you learn doing the little things to help your team win. So I never had a problem with just putting my ego aside and trying to be better. And I think you have to be an avid learner, avid reader. I got
Mhm.
read tons of books on leadership, coaching, some sports related, a lot of it not sports related. But one thing that always used to bother me, just as a player and as a coach, and there's a lot of fine coaches out there, but there are some coaches that are just not consistent with what they demand. A lot of coaches demand excellence, but when you look at their life, they're not being consistent or authentic to the what they're preaching, and that always bothered me. And that's one reason why I went back and got my PhD is because I wanted to push myself. I wanted to be the
Mhm.
best. And I'm not saying every coach needs a PhD. That was more personal too, because my dad wanted to he wanted to get his PhD in theology before he died, and he was enrolled in some courses for that. So I wanted to finish for him, but also wanted to challenge
Mhm.
myself in leadership to be the best that I can be. And there's never a point where you say I made it. I'm still trying to learn. Obviously, I still have a lot to learn, but I'm willing to. So you have to be, an avid reader, seek knowledge, seek feedback. That's the
Mhm.
most important thing. I remember, especially in my days as assistant coach, after every drill, I had a close colleague that I would confide in and ask for, objective feedback. How was my voice? How was my command? How was my teaching points? Because I wanted to
Mhm.
get better, and I remember when I first started kind of getting these scouting, every coach gets some scouting assignments and or defensive drills to do. And I remember I was just so monotone my first couple times, but I asked for some feedback, and they said, "Hey, you can bring a little bit more excitement, a little bit more energy in your voice."
Mhm.
And that's what coaching is. Coaching it's like giving a presentation. You have to get people to buy in. You do that with your body language. You do that with your voice, with your eyes, connecting with the players. Some coaches just look down or they just look at the screen, but you got to make eye contact. You got to use your hands properly. I took a lot of courses on my own, online communication courses, just trying to get better. I joined. I can't remember the name of it. Is when you join a speaking group and you kind of meet once every month. Uh,
That's great.
I can't remember. It's very popular, but I did that in the past. But lastly, I would say, man, like I said before, take care of yourself. Um, I try to work out as much as I can, but during the season it's so tough. I do this
Yeah.
every single man. I go in shape. But during the season, I gained about 20, 30 pounds easy. I do it every season, but I've learning to, eat a little bit better, take care of myself, drink some water. Because that's important. You see a lot of coaches really struggling with their health now because of the demands of the season. So it's important
Yeah.
that you take that time and take care of yourself.
All right, coaches taking notes, spiritual, taking care of the spiritual, work ethic, growth, lifelong learner, feedback, take care of yourself. It's great, coach. It's super great. How you've talked a lot about during our time together, a lot about how your faith has shaped your coaching philosophy and your life. And just to expand on that a little bit more, how can coaches out there, how can they marry the two, faith and coaching, so they're not separate, but that their coaching is because of their faith in Jesus?
For sure. When I talk about faith, it's just not something that you just believe in. It's also about, the what you live by. That's what shapes you the most. The Bible said faith without works is dead. It's good to, tell everybody I'm a believer and whatnot, but you know, taking those biblical principles and putting them into action is the biggest thing in my opinion. When I stepped away from the game and I looked at everything, when I told you I looked at, I made a list of everything. It came down, everything that I felt like I could have done better or whatever it was, the challenge was, it fell in these three things: accountability, connection, and empowerment. And when I look at Jesus, when you talk about accountability, him as a leader, he holds us all to, a standard of being better, to living better, not to conform to this world, to reach higher and with the way we not only think, but the way we behave and the way we treat people. And then the connection part, you saw how, in the Bible just gives example of him just connecting with people that didn't fit the model. It
Yeah.
could be a lame, it could be the blind, it could be a tax collector, it could be a fisherman. Jesus always connected with people and he looked at the heart. And I think that's the essence of coaching is to look at the heart. A lot of us are imperfect, and we're going to come with our flaws, even the coaches, but a lot of the players, man, they have flaws because they're human beings. But can you look past that? Can you look at the person that they are, but also more importantly, the person that they can be?
I love it.
That's the magic of it. And I think, and lastly, just empowering people. Jesus empowers us with His Word. He empowered the disciples to make, fishers of men. He gave them the kings of the kingdom, and that's what us as coaches. That's our role. It's not just to teach them. It's not just to give them fish, but teach them how to fish. We want to transform them from boys to men and from girls to women, and and teach them how to pay it forward themselves. And that's what the why I feel like the Bible is the number one playbook for me, and I know it's the number one playbook for others. But there's just the Bible is so rich of principles and that we all should live by. So that's number one for me.
Accountability, connection, empowerment. Love it, coach. I mean, I genuinely love that. And I took that. That's rich to share with other coaches. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm going to continue to share that and give you a footnote there, coach. I'll give you
So
credit for that one. Uh, as God moves you forward in your career, you've experienced a lot. You've experienced perseverance getting to Seton Hall, perseverance getting to the NBA, perseverance becoming an NBA head coach. As God continues to move you forward in your coaching career, During your time out, what will you do different? Will there be any new philosophies on or off the court? Will there be any new leadership principles on or off the court that you bring into your coaching the next time you pick up your whistle?
Well, I think, I mentioned the accountability, um, connection, and empowerment, and that was birthed from sitting there, um,
Mm,
looking in the mirror, and I call it ACE. ACE your leadership. I'm like ACE my leadership. Um, I've shared this kind of model with other coaches, and it's really just caught on like wildfire. Because it really gives you clarity in who you are and what you want to teach and what
right.
kind of culture you want to bring. The accountability part is, first taking accountability as a coach. Okay, have I taught them? Have I taught with clarity? And if
Mm,
I haven't, I have to take ownership for that. And that's one thing that when I look back, when I got let go, okay, I look at all the things that, you know, were within my control. It could have been philosophy, X and O's. It could have been, off the court stuff. The first piece of just leadership is really ownership. And I always say, you a lot of coaches, we teach the what and the how, but we fail to teach the why. And the why is so important to get the buy-in. When I had PJ Carlissimo, and he was a phenomenal coach, and I love PJ. But I always joke that for the first 2 years, that I played for him, I thought my name was FNAG. He you he was just old school. Back then, if a coach told you to do something, you ran through the wall first, and then you might ask them why did you have us running through the wall. But
yeah,
nowadays, before they run through the wall, they want to know the why. And
yeah,
so, as coaches, we got to teach them the why. It's so important that they understand the purpose behind it. So that's something I would do a little bit differently next time around. And then when it comes to the connection, again, the friendships, the connections, the mentorship, the spending time to get to know these players as people, so they understand that it's coming. The correction is coming from a good place. Again, we living in a different generation, a different age. When I was growing up, the coaches, was command and control. You really didn't question the coaches, and coaches really didn't spend a lot of time with you. If it wasn't outside of basketball. But now I think players, they want to know you care. There's a saying that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and that is true, especially of today, reaching today's youth, reaching today's players. You have to really spend that time getting to know them getting to know you, so that they know everything is coming from a good place, that
yeah,
you're there to help them. Because everything is built on trust, and you build trust through connection, and just there's no way around it. You spend time, in the beginning, once you take over, obviously you don't have the time yet, uh, you know, invested in the players, but you can start, with one conversation at a time. And
mm,
then lastly is the empowerment. One thing that I learned, there's two parts of empowerment. A lot of times we think about empowering other people, which is true. And, you as a coach, especially if you're a head coach, you want to empower the right people, with a voice. And you want to, we always say get the bad apples off the bus. You want the right people on the bus. You want to give the right people who are bought in, and you want to give them a voice. You want to give your players a voice if they've bought into the culture, and because now it's not just you get multiple people preaching the same thing, and that's where you become consistent and aligned with your culture. But you also have to empower yourself. And that's what I find with a lot of coaches. I've been an assistant coach I was an assistant coach for 15 years, and it's easy to go along with the status quo. It's easy to go along with what we call groupthink, and because you don't want to rock the boat. And there is a time and place. And again, your voice is choice. I've always learned to kind of present things more in a question as far
Mhm.
as absolute. When I'm talking to a head coach, and I say, "Hey, coach, what are your thoughts? What do you think about this?" Instead of saying we need to do this. That's really not wasn't my place to tell the coach what to do. My job is give suggestions but suggestions that align with the head coach's philosophy. I'm just not pulling anything out the air. But you have to empower yourself with your voice sometimes. To have courage. I always say to be a coach, man, it takes a lot of courage to stand up and do what's right. Um, one thing that I've always prided myself in is just having the head coach's back. Whenever I saw a player, or it may be another coach that was not being aligned with what we were doing, I always felt it was my job to speak up and say, that's not what coach wants right now. Again, your voice is choice. With players, I've said, hey, I can understand how you would feel that way. You make a strong point, but right now, we all got to be aligned right now. And there's 1,000 ways to skin a cat, but there's only one way right now because, a house divided will fall. So we need you to give this a chance, a real chance to work.
Yeah.
But I've always prided myself on having those hard conversations. Uh, and that's what I meant by, you know, finding your voice as a coach. And you can only do that if you know your values. If you don't know what you stand for, that's saying you'll fall for anything. But I knew, character is a big thing with me, discipline, hard work. So those are things that, I'm willing to put my neck out for. And so, I encourage, every coach, like I said, I've been kind of preaching this accountability, connection, and empowerment, and it's been transforming, and a lot of coaches, man, you'll be amazed that they want help, they want to learn how
Mm.
to grow and to get better. And so I talk to a lot of coaches, and I share that with them, and man, it's been transformation, and not just for them, but for myself. It started with me first, and I look at how when I first started taking ownership of my life and my decisions on a higher level, and there was just a lot of freedom with that.
Mm. Coach, is that just that answer? Please rewind and listen to that again. There was 15 amazing points in just that answer. And to help us grow as coaches, that was rich. I love the accountability, the connection, and the empowerment. And then, coach, I love empowering yourself.
Yes,
It's the first time I've heard that. I've always heard empower others, but I love that in the appropriate way
right.
to empower yourself to say what is right.
Yes,
And then dealing with players, dealing with head coaches, dealing with assistant coaches, to not give so many directives, but to use the form of a question
mhm,
is so disarming.
yes,
And it allows those above us and those that we're coaching to think and not just receive a directive of information. And I just love that. In trust comes through connection. Coach Griffin, this has been everything I thought it would be. This has been rich. Coaches who have listened, you can watch this as many times as you want to. Just keep rewinding or playing again or whatever we do in the digital world, where you can watch this as many times as you want to, because you're going to grow the more you take these principles. Coach, I love your perseverance. I
Thank you.
admire your perseverance. I admire that you made it to the Big East, that you made it to the NBA as a player, that you made it to the NBA as an assistant, and you made it to the NBA as a head coach. And a lot of that was because of your perseverance, and I applaud that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yes, and I cannot wait to see where God uses you next.
Amen to that.
Coaches, if you would like to, Coach Griffin, if coaches want to talk to you more,
Sure.
they want more information. They have written down some notes, but they want to ask more questions from a man who has experienced the highest of highs and then being let go. How could they best contact you?
NBA Coach Griffin at gmail.com. And I'll be
MBA
sure
Coach
to get back
Griffin
to
at gmail.com.
you.
Got it. Coaches, if you want to reach out to me, if you have questions that we can help you with at Nations of Coaches, if we can serve you in any way, would you call me at 843-509-3824 or email me at bradebaugh@nationsofcoaches.com. We are here to serve you. We're here to help you as you grow so that you influence those who you come into contact with in the coaching profession for God's glory. Thank you, Coach Griffin. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for the life that you've lived and setting an example. Thank you for your perseverance. And thank you for spending time with us today on the Nations of Coaches Growth Series.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.